Hello friends, so today we are going to install the Kubernetes cluster. So first of all, we will look after some of the prerequisites which are required to have a Kubernetes cluster up and running on our Windows machine or any Linux box or any server. So we will be using a kubeadm for installing the Kubernetes cluster this time. So first of all, let's look at some of the prerequisites that are required to have a running Kubernetes cluster. I'll be using my local machine, which is a Windows laptop, and in that I have installed a virtualbox, and in the virtualbox I will configure one node for the master and one node for the worker. So the minimum configuration that is required to run a Kubernetes cluster, it includes two CPUs, 15 GBs of storage, which is the minimum storage that is required because some of the storage is used by your operating system. You can install it on Ubuntu system or on the on CentOS, RHEL, or any other Linux distro. And the RAM which is required is 3 GB. The memory is very important, so if you have a minimum 8 GBs of RAM in your system, only then you can set up the two node cluster, or you can set up a single master node and you can deploy your pods and services or networks in that, so everything will work fine. And in addition to that, we will need a two networks adapters to be installed on the VirtualBox. One is a NAT type, which will be used to have internet connectivity of our VirtualBox virtual machines, and one is a host only network on which we will set up the cluster, and that will be required for our local communication. So if you see my VirtualBox, you will see I have two running nodes. I have installed a master node and a worker node, both are Ubuntu systems. And if you see, my memory is 3 GBs for the master node, and same goes for our worker nodes. And if you see, there are two CPUs, and on the storage side I have configured 32 GBs, and I have done a dynamic allocation, so currently it is using around 8 GBs of RAM. And if you see the networks, I have configured two networks. One is a NAT network and one is a host only network. So after installation of my two machines, I have one master node ready. So if you see, I have the NAT network. This is a NAT network on which this IP range is defined, so I will be able to reach internet to download some packages which are required. And my second network is this network. This is an internal network, and I can access my virtual machines from my local putty or mputty from this, right, to do a local SSH disk. So if you see my network configuration file, so this is a Ubuntu system. So in the NAT plan, we have so if you see my net plan configuration, so this looks something like this, right? So my external IP, I have added a route here, and it is using a DHCP. And for my other machine IP, to access from the SSH, I have configured this static IP address of this range, right? So this is how we have done the same thing on the worker node. So this is my worker node. It also has two IP addresses, right? So this is the first thing. And secondly, now let's start with the installation part. So I have configured this file which has all the steps and required commands that are used to install or set up the Kubernetes cluster. So I will share this link in the description, and you can access this and you can execute these commands. So the first thing we have to do is to install a Docker, and before that, let's see how it will be installed on our machines. So first of all, there are 4 stages for installing all the components that are required. First, we need to set up a Docker. Then we have to make some modifications or changes into our operating system, and then we have to install the kubeadm, right? So if you notice, the same three steps goes for the worker nodes. On the worker node as well, Docker install, changing OS, and the kubeadm install. If you notice, on the master node there is a kube init command we need to execute, which is different from the worker nodes. So here, this same steps you can use to configure n number of worker nodes. For in my case, I'll be using one worker node, but if you have a more worker nodes, you have 3 4 worker nodes, all these steps needs to be executed on all the worker nodes. So steps which are executed on worker node does not change. But for if you want to add a different master, then we will cover that in a different video. If you have to configure the additional master, then there are a different type of steps that need to be executed. Right, now let's go back to our virtual machines. Right, this is my virtual machine and this is a master node. So first of all, these are the three commands which are used to install Docker. The first command which is required, we need to have a curl command in order to get this curl Docker script to get downloaded from the docker.com, and then we will execute this script. So first we install curl and then we will configure the Docker. So let me copy that. I will execute this script on the master node first. Similarly, I can execute this script on the worker node as well. So it has downloaded the script, it has installed the curl, and now it is going to set up the Docker. Okay, so after executing that command, I have fast forwarded my video. So if you can see, the Docker is now installed on both master as well as on the worker node. So now we are ready to proceed with next steps. So the next steps include some of the modifications that we need to do on our system. First of all, we have to disable and enable the NAT bridge for use, so that the VR NAT filter can be configured by Kubernetes. And also, the Kubernetes cluster does not use swap, so it is mandatory that we should not use swap while configuring our Kubernetes cluster, so we will disable the swap. So let's see first off some of the systemctl configurations that we have to remove. Right, so first we will execute that on the worker node, and it has applied all those configurations, and similarly the same thing needs to be executed on the master node. So once that is done, so we will execute the swap of command to off the swap which is used by our system. So if you are using swap, then you have to disable your swap. So swap off -a, that command I have executed on worker node, and this same command I have executed on the master node. So but this is not a persistent way to keep things in place. So when the system will reboot again, it will restart, it will start the swap again. So we have disabled this swap file by commenting the fs tab. So if you see any swap file line in your fs tab, just comment it, so that when your system will boot up next time, so it will not use swap memory. So once we are ready with that and we have done that, now it's time to install the kubeadm and kubectl packages which are required for our Kubernetes cluster. So if you go through the commands, it is just updating the Ubuntu system, and then it is installing some HTTPS and CA certificate files. Curl package we have already installed, and then it will download some of the registry addresses to download the Kubernetes package, and then it will add it in the apt repository, and then it will run the apt-get update again, and then it will execute the install command to install the kubelet, kubeadm and kubectl commands. So let's do that. So let's execute first on the master node, and similarly we can execute these commands on the worker node as well in the parallel. So if you have noticed, these three steps, the Docker install, the Linux and Ubuntu changes, the OS level changes, and kubeadm install, we have executed at once. So these are the parallel steps. right? So we have execute. So these package installation, it takes place based on your network bandwidth. So it has found that these packages were already installed on my system and the version is updated, so it has skipped that. But in your case, it might install and it can take some time. So generally, if you talk about steps, the Docker install, it takes around 2 to 3 minutes. This doesn't take much time, 1 minute, and the Kubernetes installation also take not more than 5 minutes, right? So now we are ready with our installation stuff. Now we will set up our Kubernetes cluster. So first of all, we have to set up the master node. So the master node, uh, this is, I will explain the command, that what all parameters we are giving to this. So first of all, the advertise API server. Advertise API server means that on which IP address your Kubernetes cluster is configured. So if you have noticed, let me hash that. So if you have noticed, we have two IP addresses configured. One is for external network and one is for internal network. Make sure that we are configuring our Kubernetes cluster only on the internal network, which is a host only network adapter, right? So you cannot configure your cluster here because these IP addresses, these range of IP addresses does not communicate within your VMs. So we need something which communicates within our VMs. So this is a right adapter to use, right? So the IP address which is configured on your host adapter, that needs to be used. And other than that, we have configured what is a pod network. If you notice, we will cover that in the later videos. That pod network is the pod configuration has a separate network in which all the pods are deployed, and each pod gets the IP address from this network. So I am taking, this is a default which is there, which is 192.168. Let me change that, 0.0.1. So, and in the end we have configured the hyphen v is equal to 5. That is a verbose mode. So if you want to see that what all things your kubeadm command is doing, then you can configure that. So if you don't want to use the verbose, then you can simply remove this flag. So in our case, just in case of troubleshooting, we are putting it here. So let me execute kubeadm command now. Right, so if you see the kubeadm command, this command doesn't need to be executed on the worker nodes. This command is meant to be executed only on the master node. So if you see now this your kubeadm command, it is pulling the images from the Google Cloud, one of the components in the control plane of Kubernetes is API server, so it's pulling the image of that. Similarly, it will pull all the images of the required components, like it is pulling the image for controller manager, then it will pull the image of etcd scheduler. All those components belong to the control plane. So all these default images are configured inside the Google Cloud. This is GCR is a Google Cloud Registry server in which all the base images are there. So all the open source um, uh, things, or even if the Red Hat OpenShift, so all those components use these base images, and based on that they do their modifications, and we have additional the community or the open source community, they put some more efforts in that, and based on that your Kubernetes and all those technologies are built in, right? So kube proxy server, all these components, they are get pulled from the Google Cloud. After pulling these Google Cloud images, it will do some other stuff. So I'm pausing the video and I will see you after the unpause. So if you'll see, the control plane images are pulled in, and then it has configured the CA certificates. The CA certificates are used to interact with one component to another component. For example, the HCD server, when it needs to communicate to controller manager, kubelet, or any other service, then um, it will use a SSL certificates. Right. So with this, we have finished the installation of our Kubernetes cluster. So if you'll see, there are some steps mentioned here. Just copy these steps. These are very important steps, right? So if you read that, so if you're not a root, if you're using any other user, then you need to copy execute this command in your home directory so that you are able to access the Kubernetes cluster. It has a bunch of tokens and keys which is used to communicate with Kubernetes cluster, right? And if you are alternatively, if you are a root user, in my case, I'm using installing the Kubernetes cluster as a root user, so you need to execute this command so that you can access your Kubernetes cluster. So let me export the kubeconfig, right? So if I will check the kubectl get nodes, I will see that my master node is configured and it is in the ready state. So the last command which is here, it is used to join the cluster as a worker node. So this command you have to keep a note of, and you have to save it. So if you are configuring n number of worker nodes, then you need to have this command so that your worker node should join this cluster. So I'm executing this command on the worker node. So my package installation was done. So I'm executing this command on the worker node. Then it is pulling some information from the master node, and it will configure itself within the cluster. Right, so if you will execute again, so now we have executed the join command. If you will execute your node, you will see that worker node is also configured and it's in the ready state. Right, so this is one thing. So all the control plane pods are configured inside the kube system. So if I'll execute kube system, if I'll see all the pods in the kube system namespace, you will see that core DNS and HCD server, API server, controller manager, proxy, and everything is configured. And some of the pods are still in a process of creation. Apart from that, the Kubernetes cluster uses the different networking techniques to communicate with each other. So we will look at the detail of that one in some another video. So for now, you can just note that we will be installing a Calico network. There are some other networks as well. They are also called CNI container network interfaces, which is used for communication. So in our case, I'll be using Calico, but there are some other CNIs as well, which is like Fananel, Weaver, and so on. So we will be using this. So I will apply the Calico network here. So if you'll see, it has fetched several YML files from the Calico project, and it is applying all those. So once our Calico is installed, so then you will see the pods. There will be a pods for Calico as well. So once everything is ready, then you will be able to configure your pods inside the cluster. Right, so if you'll see get nodes, both nodes are in the ready state. So let us try and build some project. So I will run a pod called nginx-pod, and I will be using the Docker image of nginx. So once I'm done that, I will mention the port as well. So it will run on the port 80. Right, so if you will see in the default namespace, our pod is created. This is just for the testing purpose, right? So it is pulling the image. So if you will see the describe command here, so it will show you that it is pulling the image, and once the image is pulled, then it will execute the pod. if I'll run the describe command on the nginx pod, so I have to mention it is a pod type. So you will see um, it is pulling, and it has given some error. So it is saying that the calico is not ready yet. So once the calico will be ready, so then this pod will come in the running state. So it might take some time. There is no error as such, but there are a lot of images that calico pulls, so it can take some time. Meanwhile, we need our pod to be exposed outside. So let us create a configuration based on that for our service, right? So we will say kubectl expose pod, and we will mention our pod name, and we will mention what type of service it is. Type, we can ask it's a node pod type, right? And let's expose that. So once our pod will be ready, so then we will be able to get a pod. So it's still in the container creating stage, right? It can take some time. So till our system is getting ready, I will let us see the status. Yeah, it's still in the initializing phase. So once our pods are ready, so I will unpause the video. So it can take 2 to 3 minutes. So now all our pods are in the ready state, and I have seen that our pod is using this port for a node port. So the node port is a type of service which exposes your port on your IP address, and in the svc, if you'll run the kubectl get svc command, you will get the number of the port that needs to be configured, that is configured for your network for this nginx pod. So let me try that. So let me copy paste the port number and the IP address that my machine is using is 192.168.56.210, right, and colon. So if you'll see that our nginx has configured on this node. So similarly, node port is exposed on all the nodes of within the cluster. So my worker node IP address is 211, and you will see the nginx is accessible on this port as well. So that's it from this video of Kubernetes installation. Hope you have liked it, and if you want to see the Hindi version of the video, then the link is given in the description. Thank you very much. And related to this installation, if you have any comments and queries, then you can put a comment on my video and I'll be happy to help. Thank you.